Hello and welcome everyone to the Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival for 2021. How exciting it is to be in person in these crazy times. We've got people watching us on Zoom, so a big hello to them. We've got people watching in libraries across New South Wales as well, which is really exciting too. I just want to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional owners of this land and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm Tim Ayliffe. I'm the managing editor of TV News at the ABC, also a crime thriller writer, like my three guests here today. Jack Beaumont, welcome to you, The Frenchman, terrific book.
Thank you.
LA Larkin, Louisa, incredibly has 2 books out this year, The Safe Place and Widow's Island. 3 books out this year. Well, I missed that one. 2 unbelievable. But and James Pheelps, who's a writer of non-fiction's book, but he's for non-fiction books, 10, I think, and he's just written Inside Man, which is a terrific thriller, which we'll be digging into a little bit later as well. As you already have seen, COVID protocols are in place, so there's a little bit of housekeeping I'll just quickly run through. We're all double vaxxed up here. We've all checked in with our QR codes, and we should, for everyone, you could keep your masks on unless you're eating and drinking. And we'll obviously be, having ours off so that people can properly, hear us. Please mute your mobile phones. Don't record the session. If you're taking photos, please turn off your flash and feel free to share anything via social media at Bad Crime Sydney, and hashtag is Bad Crime Sydney as well. And we're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end. Probably allow around 20 minutes for that. So those that are watching online, please drop those questions into the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. And for you in the audience, just when I invite you for questions, just stick up your hand and I'll try to get to as many as possible. And I'll repeat those questions so everyone watching online can hear you as well. So, Thrills and Chills, the art of the thriller is our session. Let's start by getting to know our writers a little bit. LA Larkin, Louisa, tell us a bit about yourself and your path to writing.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you here, and welcome to the people who are obviously watching us remotely. Many years ago, I studied literature at university, and I wanted to write novels. Then when I graduated, everyone said to me, "Don't do that. You'll never make any money. It's really hard, et cetera, et cetera." So I went into magazine publishing instead. And I stayed there for many years, but it wasn't really my thing. I didn't really enjoy it. Cutting a very long story short, I decided to take a break. And I, as a backpacker, as you can probably tell from my accent, originally from the UK, 20 odd years ago, I came here as a backpacker, fell in love with Sydney, loved it, said, this is where I want to be. And I think actually when you're a migrant to a country, you reassess your life, you reassess what you want to do with it. And that thing about wanting to be a novelist came to the forefront, and I thought, I've moved to a new country, I've started a new life, this is the time. And so, I'm very lucky. I started writing when I was in a full-time job, then went down to part-time after my first book did well. And then after my second book, I basically decided that I was going to take the risk and I was going to become a full-time writer. And I'm so pleased I did, because I get to do wonderful events like this.
James, you're a sports journalist who turned non-fiction writer, and then a non-fiction writer who turned crime thriller writer. Is writing crime novels something you always wanted to do?
I'm not sure, actually. Just listening to the path there from LA, and mine's completely different. While you studied literature, I studied girls, beer, and rugby league. A bit of a wild teenager, and I got into writing through rugby league. So I became a journalist off the back of probably my rugby league contacts and the people I knew from playing the game. And it was funny when I walked into the job, and I thought, I can't do this, I can't write. I had the stories there and started doing it. My first day, I got a byline, and they hardly changed my copy. And people started saying, "Oh, you're a great writer," and made me think back to when I was a kid. I actually always wanted to be a writer from when I was 4 or 5. So Mum actually got out all these little books that I'd written, and I didn't even have a clue. And she goes, "These are your first books." And I was reading Stephen King when I was 5. And somewhere along the way, I got lost and thought that it was beyond me, that I wasn't talented enough or capable to do it. and it came through a roundabout way. But to answer your question, once I got into rugby league, I started doing sports biographies, and I couldn't handle taking time off to write about sport when I'd done it all year. So I asked to do something different, and that got me into the prisons. And it was just by chance. I was at a barbecue after the publisher said, yeah, do whatever you want, we'll give you a contract. And that weekend I was at a barbecue with some parents from school, and a prison guard was there telling all these horrible stories around the fire. And I sort of took a note and I said, I'll contact this guy on Tuesday, and if half the stuff he says is true, I've got a book. Turns out that he was telling the watered down versions of those stories because, you know, there were parents around and, you know, he's giving the G-rated stories. So
Yeah.
fell into it that way, and yeah, became very passionate about the criminals and some of their stories. And, you know, it almost is fictional, which is probably why I like writing about it.
Yeah, it's frightening actually. And I want to dig into the prison stuff a little bit later, because that stuff did keep me up at night and has actually made me an even more law-abiding citizen than I was before. Jack Beaumont, of course, this is your pen name because you've had a pretty interesting life, from French fighter pilot to spy. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I basically, as you would tell with my accent, I'm French originally, and so I joined the Air Force at 18. I did as a student fighter pilot. I did my first war mission at 21 as a fighter pilot, and then I had a flying accident after flying for a few years on single-seaters for dogfight fighter jets.
Tell us a little bit about that.
I crashed a jet with me inside, basically. So I was in a dogfight training. I took too many G's looking behind. So the G is gravity. So I took 11.3 G's looking behind. So my spine was twisted and pressurized in the same time. So it has been pushing out 3 discs on the lower back. So I was paralyzed of the left leg in the plane. So I couldn't eject. So I tried to land the plane, and I couldn't keep the axe of the runway when I landed. So the plane went on the right side of the runway. The landing gear had been hitting the grass, and then I went on a fireball on a few hundred meters on the right side of the runway. And so I was back on a jet 3 months after. And then because of the pain, I had to stop a few months after. And then I became a military pilot for Special Forces. So I joined the Special Forces, and I did the hunt of the Serbian war criminals in the Balkans for 2 years. And then I had a second surgery on the back because of a survival training, which didn't go well. And then I was recruited by the French Secret Service and internally selected to be an operative on the field. And I did 8 years doing clandestine operations on the false identity. And my wife's Australian, so I came to Australia, and one day having some beers with a mate, he said, you should write a book as a cathartic process. And that's how it all started.
Just on the plane, what's a plane like that cost?
The one I crashed is 80 million euros.
Right. Okay. And there's some kind of payment plan in place.
No. Otherwise, my grandkids would still pay it. You
know. Look, good crime thrillers, and having read all of yours, I can testify they are great reads. Shine light into dark places. All 3 of these books we're talking about today do exactly that, giving us a real look into the darker side of our world. And I've got a question for all of you on that. I'll start with you, L.A. Larkin. The Safe Place. What was the dark place you wanted to take the readers, and why?
So for The Safe Place,
Yeah.
the new one. Yeah. Okay. So with The Safe Place, what I wanted to do with this book was I wanted to have a central character who has been ostracized by her hometown. And in the beginning of the book, we don't know why. She's isolated. She lives alone in the woods with just her dog. She's very afraid. And nobody in the town believes her. Nobody in the town supports her. I don't want to tell you too much about the story, but there is something she claimed happened. And the sheriff of the town, it's set in Washington State in the USA, doesn't believe her. But there's a reason why he doesn't believe her. The thing about the book is that she is the only witness to a serial arsonist who is using fire to cover up his crimes, and they are brutal crimes. Again, the sheriff doesn't believe her. And so the kind of the dark side of this story is the terror and the trauma of this vulnerable young woman, and she's very young, she lives alone. Nobody believes her. The law enforcement officers that are supposed to support her and help her do not do so. And the serial killer then goes after her. So that's very much the dark side of the story. With Widow's Island, which is the other one, which is the one that came out earlier this year, that's again got a sort of serial killer element to it. But the big theme of that one is the hideous nature of cyber trolls and how they can go about destroying people's lives, happiness, reputations, drive them to suicide. There are lots of awful stories of teenagers who've been driven to suicide by vicious troll attacks. And then at the other end of the spectrum, of course, you've got the political trolling that goes on, where you've got big troll farms. And I'm sure you've probably all heard about those. I actually visited one in St. Petersburg in Russia. It's the one that has been repeatedly reported to have been behind the vicious hate campaign that went on social media during the Trump election. And the whole idea of it was to ensure that Trump was elected. And this troll farm is literally like a call center. Desk upon desk upon desk upon desk. And instead of, the little headphones that all the call center people wear, it's computer after computer after computer. And they're all given scripts, they're given identities, fake identities. I'm a mum who lives in California. I've got two lovely children, and I don't want Mexicans coming into America. We need a wall. And so they spread this hatred through that. And that's the sort of the dark and the, I suppose, the insidious side that is the background to Widow's Island as well.
James, with Inside Man, it's pretty clear prisons are nasty places. Hell of a place and a very clever plot to be able to set, a thriller inside effectively a prison. What were you wanting to convey to the reader there?
Yeah, it was a strange one because I had a brief before I started in a contract, and my brief was to create an action hero that could sustain a series, and the first one had to be set in a prison. So beginning, you think, that's easy, no worries. But the easiest way to do it is to drop a ready-made action hero into a prison. So someone that's already skilled goes undercover, solves some plot and comes out. But for me, that wasn't going to do it. Having written loads of prison books, the thing that really intrigued everyone and certainly intrigued me was the fear of prison. And the only way you can experience prison is going in there. And, the premise is, what would an 18-year-old kid deal with this sort of stuff going in? So I needed to capture that fear element. So my guy had to be an untrained kid that goes into prison at 18 and somehow becomes an action hero. So yeah, created pretty intense plot and a lot of thinking and beers to be able to come up with his storyline. But yeah, in terms of dark places, the book begins with the cell door slamming shut. It's 10 o'clock at night. They turn the lights off. He's alone. You can't hear a sound. Like in prison at Long Bay, where this is set, there's no traffic. There's no one around. Everyone goes to bed early. He couldn't even hear a car in the distance. And he's on a poo-stained, urine-soaked, mattress with shit all over the walls. And yeah, he wants to break down, but he doesn't. And yeah, that's where it begins. And that's not even the beginning of how dark it was. And I think the darkest bit for me is I absolutely break this guy down. So before I wanted to create the hero, I wanted him to actually be terrorized, brutalized, taken to his actual base level. And I think that will, in the later books, explain a little bit of, why he does these things and how we can do it. And unlike you with all your training, he's going to learn all his spycraft in prison. So yeah, he'll be bred pretty tough. So yeah, dark places.
Jack, sort of a different, I guess, question for you on this, because The Frenchman, in many ways, obviously a work of fiction, but rooted in fact. And your main character, Alec Depayne, how real is he? How close is he to you?
Well, he's 80%, let's say 90% real. I would agree with James. I didn't put it in the Frenchman, but I've been in a few jails in various countries, and it's quite a dark place to be. On the wrong side, on the being jailed. Yeah, so the idea was really what I wanted to address was not to reveal any high state secrets, was more to address the fact that actually 90% of the spies are married with kids. And so what is really hard in this job is that you have to be someone else doing some clandestine operations, or going on the illegal part of the things and doing some really, really dark things, and basically destroying the life of some people. And then you have to come back home and you have your kids and your wife, and you have to be a husband and a dad. And that's very hard psychologically, and you end up losing yourself, not knowing who you are anymore. And so that's because I had this PTSD, waking up at night, checking every window, every door of the house in the dark with a knife in my hand. I thought I need to put this on paper, basically, but I was not allowed to do an autobiography, so I had to be a fiction.
So sitting here, I mean, there's part of this world that really never leaves you, is there? So looking around the crowd, or if you're in a restaurant, your mind's doing things that ours aren't, right? You're looking at people with questions.
Yeah, well, good on you. You're lucky. That's the big problem, is that you have to become paranoid, because that's what's gonna save your life. But the problem is there is a tipping point where the paranoia takes too much, and that's really hard to get rid of.
We're talking a little bit, we touched on research before, and LA Larkin, getting into that place in Moscow, the misinformation. How'd you get in there?
So sorry, forgot. It was in St. Petersburg, and how I got in was because once the Trump election had finished, the whole place was cleaned out, because the FBI was investigating it. There were journalists all over the world looking into it, trying to work out where all this misinformation that was coming from. All these people, these bots that were being sent out on social media, churning out all this sort of incitements to hatred. And one of the places it came from was this particular troll farm. And so it was empty, but it was like everything had been left as if it'd been left in a hurry, but no paper, like no evidence, as far as I could see, left of what had actually gone there. But you could see that it was like literally, there was a sort of, I suppose it was like a little cake that had been left behind, and it gone green and moldy, but it was still there on the desk. It was sort of this really odd feeling. Somebody literally, they just left quickly. So it wasn't, I didn't actually get to see them in action. I would never have been allowed to do that.
So who let you in?
Well, the doors were like open, like literally the place is abandoned.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was doing a bit of a tour of Russia, and I knew I wanted to just see. I just turned up on the street, and I just wanted to see if I could actually, I thought, I'll take a photo of the outside of the building. And I thought, hold on a second, the door's open, and it doesn't look like there's anybody there. And it was almost like a ghost building. It was really peculiar. I was quick though, because I didn't want to get in trouble. Because you don't want to get trouble in Russia, do you?
No,
I didn't.
No, I mean.
So I just, went, oh, this is like really weird and creepy, and left quickly.
Yeah, I'd imagine it would have been a bit. I mean, like Russia is spending a third of its budget on defense and security right now, and there are more people locked up in Russia for being political activists or opposition figures than the height of the Cold War. So this is not the great climate to be able to do some of that. But well done, and good to see you made it out.
I was just a bit lucky, I think, to be honest. Yeah.
James, prisons. How much time have you spent in one?
A fair bit, but thankfully on the right side. And in terms, they're horrendous places. They really are. And just in terms of the research and the danger, I think because I did so many non-fiction books on crime, I know a lot of criminals really well. That's part of the job. That's part of the interview process, and it's flung into their world, and it does become dangerous. To tell you how dangerous it does become, I actually had a hit put out on me probably about 10 years ago after I wrote a book on Goulburn Jail. One of the guys in there who's a notorious killer and gang member, he didn't like something that I wrote. It was something innocuous. It was about him getting stabbed, but apparently it made him look weak. And because of that, he put a $100,000 bounty on my head. And I had members of ASIO come and knock on my door and tell me about it and tell me to take it very seriously because he had active gang members outside. And he said that, you know, a young kid might try and make a name for himself and take it out. So.
Did you ever see anything that made you think?
No,
that
I
they were-
didn't. But you know, I pretended it didn't worry me, but I ended up with baseball bats in every car, and I'd walk up my driveway and have a look around before I drive my car out, because as Jack would know, you know, 90% of these hits occur when you're reversing out of your driveway. And I ended up changing up my routine, not going to the gym at the same time. But every time I rolled into an underground car park, it was a little bit of a, you know, mission. But you did pick up habits that you just would do naturally to protect yourself.
Did you talk to many like criminals or those that spent time inside?
Yeah, I've got an actually really funny story on how I met one guy. So I was sitting at work one day and an email came through from a really strange address, and he introduced himself, his name, and said he wanted to talk to me and meet me and give me some stories. And I looked the guy up. He was 6'6", had gold teeth, completely bald, covered in tattoos. He was a founding member of a gang called Brothers for Life. And he'd been in jail for about to do a hit. So he was an alleged hitman. He got found with a gun in his bag and a license and $10,000 cash. So he was going to do the hit when the cops picked him up. And anyway, he wanted to meet me. And the guys at work go, "You can't meet him. He's probably going to kill you. Like, you've written something about him or done something wrong, or he's putting a hit out on someone else." And I said, "Oh yeah, I won't meet him." But I couldn't resist. The journalist in me and the storyteller in me thought this guy could be a great contact. So I actually went out and met him. I arranged to do it near my boxing gym, and I had, you know, 12 big Maori mates of mine sitting there just in case, and ended up being one of the nicest blokes I think I've met, aside for what he does in his career, and gave me that many stories.
Details.
Well, yeah, he said he's got no. He says he's a hitman. He tells me off the record, and he tells me one story where Basim Harmsy, who's Brothers for Life, he's that guy that's famous for making all those calls from Supermax and ordering hits and bashings. Well, Goldie was on the other end of those calls. So he told me about this one where Basim called him, and the transcripts actually were played in a court case in Basim's trial. And Basim's going, yeah, smash his knees out right now. And you could hear Goldie get whack, bang, and the screams, and takes his teeth out in this episode. And yeah, but he acts like he's a really sweet guy when you're around him, you get to know him.
Yeah.
And I love how you keep resorting back to, but he's a good
Well,
bloke.
no, but that's part of their charm. The psychopaths can put that on. And another one that I can tell you about is Roger Rogerson, who I'm sure you're all familiar with. He helped me with my first book, Long Bay Jail. And we spent weeks and weeks driving around. He was introducing me to old cop mates, to prison guards. And I was in the car with him on one Sunday. We went over to North Sydney to meet a guy, dropped him off. I woke up the next morning, back page of the paper is a picture of a blue bag, and he's been taken to jail. And he'd allegedly killed someone. I couldn't believe it. He was like, "This is Uncle Roger." And I went through the dates. I'd been with him the day before he murdered that guy in the shed. So, you know, it's pretty wild to think. And that's the mindset when you're writing fiction as well. You know, these are real characters that we have to capture. And, you know, sociopaths and psychopaths, they're great actors. And is the blinking thing true?
Which blinking?
They don't blink?
No, I've seen some psychopaths, they do blink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've been watching people for blinking, so I probably trusted too many psychopaths.
Jack, let's talk a little bit about, so the research for our other two authors here is something we're actively out there, you know, doing, and myself is included. But for you, it's a lived experience. So tell us a little bit more around some of the, I guess, the tradecraft of being a spy. And there's the acronym MICE that you sort of touched on earlier, but let's tell our audience about that.
So yeah, so the book is based on basically one main mission I did. Of course, I changed other countries, etc. But and then you have a few anecdotes, which are a bit all over the place. But it represents basically three missions I did. When on 8 years I did a bit more than 100 globally, and so the process is basically always the same. You detect a person of interest who's got the intelligence you need in his mind, he or her mind. Sometimes it can be pure operational, so the intelligence you need is in a locked suitcase or in a safe or in an encrypted hard drive or this kind of stuff. But for the human part of it, you're gonna first do an environment of the person. So you're gonna be a ghost, basically following this person and try to identify also through the technical environment, which is doing all his emails and phone, etc. You're going to detect what we call the mice, which is the 4 leverages to manipulate someone. So it's M for money, I for ideology, C for coercion, and E for ego. And so the purpose is to identify the mice and to decide on which leverage you're going to play. And then you enter this person's life with another identity, knowing already a lot about this person and to confirm the mice. And if the mice is confirmed, then you go to the next step, which is let's say, approach and the recruitment of this person. And then the manipulation goes on based on the mice you detected. And sometimes you have some people who have no mice because they are a good husband, a good dad, they have enough money, they don't have any specific ideology, etc. So you're gonna basically blow up his life so that you can create a mice. And after, when you finally get the information you need from this person's mind, you don't want anyone else to know that you've got this information. You don't want anyone else to have the same information. So you have to make sure that this person can't talk anymore.
Another, I guess, question around, you touched on this earlier, but your family life in your book, it's a big part of the book because it was really important for you, and your book's being compared to Le Carré's work in that he's that sort of more subtle storytelling rooted in fact, and I agree with that comparison. How important was it for you? You talked about this being a cathartic process to get that family, I guess, interaction right in the book.
Well, because it's the vision you have of the spy life usually in movies or in other books is not the true life of a spy, and the true life of a spy is with the family, and it's really heavy on the family, as on the spy, of course, but as on your wife, and the kids were too young, so they didn't really realize. But my wife, for sure, you lose all your social life, you lose all your friends. You get totally isolated, and then you have a totally paranoid husband. So it's very hard because you can't share it with anyone, you can't talk with anyone, and I think it was very important for me to tell about this so that the people can understand that this job, because it's a job, actually has a kind of a sacrifice side of it, where doing it, you know that you're going to seriously impact your family. And a massive amount of the spies are, of course, getting divorced.
This session is a course called The Art of the Thriller. So I want to talk a little bit about plot and get a feel for the kind of writers that you are. Louisa, do you plan? You just sit down and go for it. How does it work for you?
So you mean, am I a plotter or a pantser?
I didn't want to use
Yeah. So I used to be a pantser. So when I started out, it was I'd have a general theme that I wanted to write around. I worked out the best characters to tell that particular story. I broadly knew how it was going to end, and then I started writing. I changed to a plotter pretty much after I think about the 4th book, because once you're in a contract with a publisher, there is a deadline, there's a delivery deadline, and you need to deliver the book by that date. And that puts a lot more pressure, I think. And I began to realize that if I plotted in quite a bit of detail, then there was less likelihood that I would go down a sort of a bit of a dark alley in terms of the direction of the story that actually wasn't good for the story. It didn't take me where I needed to go. But saying that, the one thing I just would like to say is that thrillers are very well known for, they're big on plot. You know, there's lots of excitement, plot twists, you know, cliffhangers, you know, surprises and revelations, and that's what keeps them thrilling. But for me, the single most important thing when writing a thriller are the characters. The characters make or break that story. If your readers don't engage with that central character, feel for that central character, go on that roller coaster ride, that, oh my goodness, how are they going to get out of this? The terror, the excitement, the hope, the despair with that central character, then you've lost them. So I'm a big believer, and I spend probably most of my time actually planning the characters. Who is the best to tell this story? What is their background? Who are the supporting characters? And of course, who is the antagonist? Who are they? Why are they? And, you know, it just so happens that in my last few books, they've been serial killers, which is, you know, and it's been very interesting and daunting. And actually, I found myself finding it very difficult to get inside the head of such a person, because I wanted some chapters in, so both The Widow's Island and The Safe Place, which is the most recent one. I wanted some chapters from their point of view. So you're speaking in their voice. And you know, you can actually watch, you know, from YouTube, you can watch interviews, you know, law enforcement interviewing, you know, these serial killers. And it's quite disturbing, but I wanted to know a bit more about this, particularly as I'm setting my books at the moment in America. And that's when I knew I wanted to talk to somebody in the FBI if I could, because I was setting the books in and around Seattle, and it needed to be the Seattle office. And to cut a long story short, I was thinking, why would an FBI agent in America talk to me living in Australia when all the big name authors in America are telling me that the FBI are withdrawing from cooperating with writers and screenwriters because they've been burnt, as in they've been misrepresented, and you know, they're a bit over it. And I thought, well, I haven't got really a chance. But I was very lucky because a retired detective that has been very helpful to me in the past managed to actually put me in touch with an FBI special agent in Seattle. And but this is back in 2018, we could actually fly. We could fly to other countries and there wasn't a problem. And I flew for a festival there in New York first, and then I went to Seattle and I met this special agent. And I can honestly tell you, you know, like you have moments in your lives when you meet someone and you know it's a pivotal moment. And you look at them and you think, and I can honestly say there are not many people in this world that I look up to and truly admire, but the stories that she was telling me and what she had to deal with, I was pretty much crying with some of the stories that she was telling, and I couldn't imagine how she could do what she has to do to protect people. And it was a very interesting moment because she helped me understand a lot more about how serial killers operate. But on the profoundly personal, like you were talking about, like the family aspect. So for her and her job as a mum, what it was like. And I feel very privileged that she was willing to share that with me. And that has led to the FBI characters in those books.
Okay. James, so the original question's around plot, and we'll add character to that as well, because, you know, plot, character, whether the setting's a character as well is pivotal. I guess the question for you on that, I want to know how you plot and how you write, but do people reading The Inside Man, is there anyone out there that's recognizing themselves in that book?
I have yeah, this is funny. I love funny stories, as you can tell. But when I was naming some of the characters, just side characters, people that come into the book, you struggle for names. Like you just think, what am I going to call this bloke? And Joe Smith, Sean Smith. So I came up with a way where I'd use a friend's first name and then another friend's last name, and generally they'd be mates. And for the despicable characters, the pedophiles and things like that, I actually used people I don't like. And I'd forgotten all about it. And a bloke from my football team, one of the parents that the kids I coach here at me, goes, "Oh, what did that bloke think of being the pedophile?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I looked through and say his name was, I'm not going to say his real name, but yeah,
John Smith.
it was very close. It was just a couple of letters changed. I went, "Oh, shit." So I'm really looking forward to running into this bloke when we get back down the football club on the beers.
And what about plot then? Do you just sit down and go, or have you got a big outline done, or just an idea in your mind?
A little bit of both. Like I don't strategically sit there and read literature books on how to plot, but I guess I procrastinate a little bit at the start. And every window in my house ends up getting filled with a marker. I've got these great paint pens. My wife absolutely hates me. But yeah, every bit of glass is covered in scroll. I look like a serial killer myself, but generally it just starts out with a plot. This is where it's going to start. This is where it's going to end. And these are some of the things that might happen. But in terms of, I actually really plan chapters. So I'll write my first chapter up, then I'll spend weeks on what's going to happen in the next chapter. And you've got to problem solve. But there's all these things you can't get into from here to here. This is not going to be believable. And you're writing ideas on the wall and the next day researching. Then once you've got all that plotted out, you go and write it. And then again, next chapter. So it's like almost a mini book in each chapter of plotting.
So I think of it sometimes a little bit like a chess game as well, that, if you stuff up some of these moves here, someone else is going to win the game. That means, no one's going to enjoy your book. It's not going to make sense.
Yeah, and I found what you said about the character really interesting. Being my first fiction, haven't had a lot to do with character development. And I was probably lucky. A lot of my characters flowed organically. And a lot of that was situational. That was your environment dictates your character, and the actions you take are going to portray what sort of person you are. And I found it interesting with Riley Jack's my main guy. So he kills 3 people that we know of. And at the end of the book, everyone's saying, "Oh, he's such a nice guy, we love him." But it's all dictated by the environment and the situations that he was in that caused him to do that. I had a little bit of fun with that, trying to, create a likable guy that's actually going around doing these horrible things. So for me, that was quite fun.
And Jack, for you, we've gone over the sort of the cathartic, process with this book, but plotting it, you're drawing from, so 100 missions you did. So you're drawing from those, but ensuring that that you're not giving away any, state secrets, literally.
Yeah, I mean, for the Frenchman, so it was based on a real mission. So I knew, of course, where I was going, but I had to make it a fiction. And maybe I went the wrong way. So the how do you say plotting or pantsing. So I went maybe too much pantsing. And now for the second one, I'm going more plotting, because I want to be able to know exactly where I am and be able to come back to some places where I have to insert some clues. So I find it mentally easier. And for the characters, they are mainly based on real characters. So those guys, Templar, Shrek, etc., they do exist, and it's actually almost their real nicknames. And then for the others, exactly like James, I put the names of some mates here in Australia, changing one letter, all this kind of stuff. So you can, if you know them, you can spot them. And one of them called me one day and say, "I can't believe you kicked me in the balls." And I was like, "What?" And and so in the book he gets kicked in the balls. And so he was really pissed off with that, because he thought that everyone would know, that it was him. Yeah, I like to take the names actually of some mates, because there is a sense of not eternity, but you are, writing a book, so which is something which is going to stay. and you wrote it at a certain time of your life. And so even if you read it in 20 years time, you know, at that time, you know, you think about those people around you, and you took their names to create characters.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have a little bit of fun with that. In my latest book, I named a friend of mine, Liam Callahan, in it, and he's actually just the victim. He doesn't really have a role. He just gets found with a bullet in his head. And his wife rang me up, "You killed Liam." And I said, "Has he read it yet?" No, he hasn't, but he's getting there. But yeah, it can be a lot of fun. So look, there's usually a lot of unpublished, authors or wannabe writers or writers that haven't been published watching on or in the crowd. So I'm interested in if you any tips for them. We'll start with you, Louisa.
So tips for the writing.
Tips in the craft.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I suppose one tip would be is to write about something you feel passionate about. Well, first of all, write the genre that you love. So, if you truly love crime fiction thrillers, then write it. But if you actually secretly like reading romance, then write a romance, because if it's not easy getting your first book out there. I always thought you might quite like to write a romance.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
is it you?
It's
Okay.
the prison guy, not me.
All right. So I think that's important because your first book is a lonely process often. These days, there are lots of wonderful ways for, authors to be supported. But when I started out, there weren't really. There were very few, apart from Sisters in Crime Australia, who have been amazing. They support females who write crime fiction. So I think write what you're passionate about, write what you're interested in. And then the other thing I would say is find someone who believes in you. And I know that sounds a bit kind of like twee, but when you're, as I did, full-time job, and then I'm at weekends or when I get to work early, I would start writing. I'd try and get a chapter written before the day began because I'm a morning person. I needed my husband to believe in me because I don't know how many times I said, "I don't know why I'm doing this. This is ridiculous," And, you get a bit downhearted. And then also, particularly when the process is, of course, when you try and, first of all, try and pitch it out to either an agent or a publisher, it can be really daunting. And so you do need somebody to say, come on, Louisa, just keep going, just keep doing it. And so they would be my sort of few tips.
James?
Yeah, I'm a bit old school and no nonsense. I don't believe in a lot of these routines and planning. The trick to writing is to write.
Yep.
Sit your ass down on the computer and go for it. So many people I meet tell me when they want to write a book or become a journalist, and I'll say, okay, get writing, send me a chapter. You know how many do it? That many people want a gig at the Daily Telegraph. I'll say, okay, write me some copy. Go out to an event, do it. They don't do it. So they're afraid of work. So if you're afraid of work, don't write. It's simple. And if you want to write, sit down on your bum for 10 hours each day, get it out. Don't worry about your writing or whatever. Just make sure the story, like you're in a pub and you tell that story. If you're a natural storyteller, you're halfway there. Go for it and you fix all those things later. So
yeah, it's good advice. I remember I spent quite a bit of time I was lucky to spend quite a bit of time with Bryce Courtney before he died, and he said his secret to writing was bum glue. Just sit there, and you got it. I mean, that's it. And excuses, no excuses, right? If you want to write.
And I'll tell you the way that you work out if you're a writer or not. And I did this for one of my first books. Went down the coast with nothing but a tent, a desk chair, and a desk, and obviously something to cook food with in the middle of nowhere, and wrote for a week. And if you come back with nothing, you're not a writer. Or if you leave after a day. But I came back with about 20,000 words and thought, I can do this.
You often write in a tent, don't you?
Yeah.
That's not a one-off.
And it's mainly because of distractions.
Yeah. Or a caravan? Do you do a caravan as well?
Yeah, I've upgraded to a caravan now. Yeah. It's got a toilet and a shower. The big thing was I was coming home after a week smelling like a homeless man because I hadn't showered for a week, and my wife just wouldn't. She'd take my clothes off with tongs.
You had beers?
What's that?
Did you had some beers?
Oh yeah. I've got a strategy on that. I do have a strategy. So, 2 beers, you're in the dream zone. Your writings just comes out, it flows. After 4 beers, it starts to waver off. After 6 beers, you think you're a genius and you write all night. but you're off the cliff. The next morning you come back and you go, oh shit. So if you can somehow maintain that magical 2-beer place, spectacular.
How about you, Jack? Are we drinking and writing, or?
No, look, maybe I'm not an experienced writer enough to give any advice. All I know is on my side, writing really changed my life. And so if some people want to write, I would say just go for it because you won't regret it.
I'm keen to start taking some questions from the audience, and already some coming in via the chat and Zoom. So thank you so much for that. I might go to one of those now, actually. It's for you, Jack. Did you have to get your manuscript vetted by the DGSE before publishing?
So when you leave the services and you write a book, and there are some books, usually, we don't usually, but you have some people writing books a bit more like autobiography, or because they really are upset with the services and they had a bad time and they want to kind of revenge and complain about what they've been going through. And therefore they reveal some high state secrets, and that's very dangerous. And that's very dangerous because for themselves, of course, but also for the company and also for the mates who are still on the field and still working. And I still have plenty of my really good friends who are still in the services and who are still on missions. And so the idea was clearly not to put their life at risk. And I didn't want myself to have any issues with the services. So it's really, that's why I really presented it as a fiction, and focusing on the family aspect of it. And then there are some tactics I'm giving on how we communicate in clandestine operation in other countries, etc. But before writing them down, I made sure that they were already published somewhere by someone who revenged after leaving. So it was already in the open source. And then the company, of course, was a bit pissed off that I wrote a book, but it was presented as a fiction. And then they read it, and then they came back to me saying, "Oh, actually, it could be a good advertising for the company." So yeah, it was all good.
If there's any questions, just raise your hands. Yes.
I have a question for James. What was it crossover from non-fiction to fiction, and did the readership follow?
I'll just repeat it for the Zoom audience. Was it difficult for James? Was it difficult to cross over from non-fiction to fiction?
Shit, yeah. Yeah, I thought it'd be easy having, written, probably a few million words in my life with the newspaper and, 10 books. I thought this would be a breeze, and finally I can just fucking make it up. So, rather than, relying on that, but I didn't think about point of view. I think that was my first challenge. And yeah, I got trapped. You're very omniscient when you're a non-fiction writer. You know everything. You want to tell everyone it. So getting into that frame of mind was quite difficult, but it was really enjoyable too. In terms of character development, though, I actually found that really natural. But yeah, it was just jumping around, and also being a news writer, I tended to put a lot of action in and want to tell the story straight away rather than have the slow burn. As a journo, you're restrained by space, so you're always trying to tell the story in the first 3 pass. And having that luxury was quite cool, but also a habit I had to break. And crossover, yeah, I think I have had a lot of people cross over, because the beauty of this fiction book is a lot of those stories are true, and a lot of them are stories that I haven't been able to tell in non-fiction because of different controversies or sensitivities. So they love going, trying to work out which real criminal the person is and what they were involved in. Yeah, and that's fun. But yeah, I love fiction as a real art, and it's very, very complicated if you want to break it down and get into it. But again, you just write and get there, and you fix those things up. And I am actually thinking of experimenting. I told you this before. So one of the feedback I've got is everyone really loved Jax's character, and the other part of the story they like. But I'm going to do something a little bit tricky. I'm thinking about writing the next book in first person from Jax, and then turning it into third person at the end of it to see how it comes up. See if you can get that closeness to the character that you get in first person in a third person, and then weaving the the other scenes and other points of view in afterwards. And you think you need them, you think you've got to explain it, you think you've got it, but maybe once you write the whole thing in one point of view, maybe you realise that you don't actually need that stuff.
Yeah, perspective's an interesting one, isn't it? I've heard, I mean, some writers are better writing in third person, others first person. I remember, I think it was Don Winslow, maybe I shouldn't say if I'm unsure, but I think someone had asked him about when he really, I guess, took off as a writer. And I think he said, when I switched to writing in first person. I think it was him, maybe it wasn't, but anyway, someone said that.
It's a real, I think that's a real thing for an author too. If you're writing a fiction, like I found out afterwards that something like 90% of people write in first person for their first fiction. And I, of course, wrote in third person, second person, every sort of person you could imagine. So it was quite complicated.
Question for you, Louisa. Why the US for your books?
Great question. I tend to set the books all over the world, so it's not just the US. So for instance, I did a tally the other day, and the first two books were set with Australian characters. Then I moved on to some characters that came from the UK. I've had a story that's set in South Africa, Antarctica. I've now recently moved to these two I'm holding here. These are the United States ones. It's because, well, it keeps it interesting for me to move location. And I think location, we've mentioned before, is really important. It kind of almost becomes a character in itself. And I wanted the right locations for these particular stories. And truth be told, the one that's the Widow's Island one, is based on a real island, which is actually beautiful. It's a really isolated island off Seattle. The only way on and off is on a ferry, and when there's a big storm, there is no ferry. And so the worst nightmare scenario is that you're trapped on an island with a serial killer. And so it just happened then that I thought, I know I have to set the story on an island, and it was that island, and that was in the United States. So I hope that, answers the question. Who knows where the other books are going to be?
There's a question from the audience watching on Zoom. This is a sort of more process question. So do any of us use Scrivener software to write? So I'll go first, say I don't, I just use Word. Scrivener is a program that allows you to move chapters around and organize yourself with notes. I've heard it's great. For me, Word works, but how about you, Jack?
Word.
Yeah, Word.
Yeah, Word. I tried Scrivener. I know people who absolutely, love it. Did my head in. I think it's just the way you think. It's just everyone works differently. I'm a Word person.
Well, James, I already know you write on Windows. Yeah, you write on Windows, so you're ruled out already. Greg, I think you had a question. Who's going first?
I will. For me, the best stuff I write, I kind of just get in the zone, and it flows and it flows. But if you want to do it, like you're getting from a point A to a point B, you're solving a problem or doing a task. I think you just got to break it down, leave the bits out that are too mundane, or slow it down. And you can make, I think one of the most exciting scenes in Inside Man is when my character's, he's just sitting in his cell, but he's building a bomb from prison equipment. And it's just the process of him grabbing bits and pieces and putting them in a can and cutting things. But there's a bit of the hidden danger behind it that A, a guard's going to walk in, B, the stuff he's using is going to explode. And I think that bit of background suspense and tension can also make it page turning. But yeah, just leave out the, I don't know, what do you call it? The excess.
Yeah, the question,
the stuff you don't need. Yeah.
The question was, which I forgot to read out, apologies for those watching online, was tips on writing a page turn and making sure the pages turn. L.A. Larkin?
Yeah, well, thrillers by the very definition of them need to be thrilling. And I think in terms of tips, the readers of thrillers tend to be, they're puzzle solvers. We're all puzzle solvers, mystery solvers. We want to solve the mystery before the central character does. We want to know what the outcome is, and we tend to be fairly urgent readers. So we have to be kept entertained. Readers of thrillers are not easy to please. We start off usually with a murder, a mystery, a question raised that isn't resolved until later. And that's one of the ways you actually keep the whole tension going through. I think building suspense, building suspense throughout the book, building the threat and menace against the central character. That's really important, that you don't start too high, because then you've got nowhere to go. So for instance, just, an example, in Widow's Island, Stephanie, the central character, moves to this island. And on day one of arriving in the island, she's lost her husband. That's why she's moved. Her daughter's angry at her. And then she starts getting these vicious comments on social media. Next, somebody urinates on her front door while she's out, and she comes home and finds it at night. In the morning, there's a decapitated mouse on the doormat. And it builds and it builds and it builds. And then her best friend is murdered.
Was she at a writer's camp by any?
No, she wasn't, no. So, so my tips would be very much focus on building that suspense, tightening the tension, and increasing the menace.
Jack?
Well, I think there is a time component of the threat. You have to feel that, it's getting, the more you read, the more you realize that actually, time is ticking, and the threat is coming closer and closer and closer.
Yeah. And I think you write for the reader. I mean, you need to know the kind of writer that you are, which is what I think Louisa talked about earlier. But write for the reader, thinking about them turning the pages. And one other thing, this is slightly controversial, but I'll say it because there'll be disagreement. But if you've got a hero character, so in my books, it's John Bailey character, don't let the reader learn key things before he does, because you'll lose the journey and you'll lose the suspense. Whereas if you've got a more spread plot with lots of perspectives, you can play around with when people find things out, and that's absolutely fine. But when you've got a hero character, you really want the audience, the reader, to go on that journey with your character, invest them in the character as well. So that's my.
Am I allowed to ask the host a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So your hero character, J formula.
J formula.
J formula. Does everyone know about the J formula? Does anybody know about it?
No. Shoot.
Really? So this was something that I came across when I was naming my character. My guy's called Riley Jacks. And I got thinking about characters,
Jack
and I went
Ryan,
through
Jack
them.
Irish. Yeah.
John Rambo, John Wick, Jason Bourne,
Yeah.
James Bond, literally Indiana Jones. What's the Die Hard guy? John McClane. There's only about 3 I can find that don't have J's. So
Stephanie Miller.
There you
The woman, the female character. Hooray!
Yeah, the J formula.
J formula. There you go. So that's another tip. J.
So here's one for all of us, to the panel. When you're writing, this is from Joe watching on Zoom. When you're writing about and immersed in dark places, is it difficult to step back into the normal world? I'm going to start with you, Jack, because I think it's probably a different question for you, but interested in hearing where you are now with that.
Well, I still have sometimes where I'm thinking of really dark places, and they are still there somewhere in my mind. And it's very hard in the real life when you're doing this job, and when you go to those places, it's very hard. Or when you meet, it's not so much the places, it may be more the person you are meeting, and you meet some really nasty people. And you have to pretend sometimes that you are trying to become their friends, because that's the purpose of the manipulation. You have to approach them so that you can grab the intelligence from their mind. So you have to play an actor game where you have to become friend with someone you hate and who is absolutely horrible. And then after, when you come back, it's really hard to put your mind at the right place and remember that, actually you really hate him.
L.A. Larkin, we're getting really close to time.
No, I'll be quick. So writing the serial killer characters, as I mentioned before, I found extremely difficult, but it also actually to adopt that voice, to be in that point of view. I found that, at nighttime, I would wake up in the middle of the night having had nightmares. And my husband will tell you this, it's actually quite funny, really. But So this was happening, and when it comes to fight or flight, I'm a fight. I know this. And so I woke up from this nightmare where I dreamt somebody was trying to kill me, and I literally leapt out of bed and I was like ready to fight. And my husband's sitting up in bed going, what? And I'm going, and I literally could see somebody in the room. I could see this person. And then as I came, out of that dream, I realized there's nobody there. And my poor husband almost had a heart attack. So I'm sorry.
James?
No, I love the dark. I'm a horror fan from when I was a kid, and that's the stuff I read. It was normal for me, and I'm a bit of a, I guess, emotionless person at times, and some of that's through my job. I was at the Telegraph looking at dead bodies and stuff as a crime writer, and getting threats from early on, and not a lot phases me now. I just sort of let it all pass over my head and live my life. I don't let people affect me.
Well, this is a cheery note to end on. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thanks to all of you, not only for today's chat, but for writing great books that I really enjoyed reading in my preparation for this. These three authors and I will be outside signing books if you're interested in purchasing books later on and coming for another chat. And also there's little questionnaires on your seats if you have a moment to fill those out. So yeah, just want to thank everyone watching around libraries around New South Wales. For those watching via Zoom, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for supporting writers, and great to be here in person talking to you all.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks.
And I'd just like to invite anybody that actually has some questions about writing or wants to know a little bit more or see some of these crazy wall pictures I've got or anything like that to hit me up on Instagram. And, I like dealing with people that have got a passion in it. So send me a note if you want to know anything or just say good day.
Good stuff. Thanks, James. I'm sure the others will be happy for that too. So thanks again.